Cool. So I'm going to start by I'm going to talk about a project that I did a few years ago, where I made this PDF that you load up in your Chrome browser, and you can play Breakout inside it. So it's a totally normal PDF, totally normal Chrome browser, and you just open it up and things start moving. Okay, I'm not a great Breakout player. So I'm going to talk about how that works, and I'm going to talk about some of the hacks I had to do to get it to work. So I want to start out by talking a bit about the PDF format, because you may not actually know that much about it. If you're like me, you've probably read a bunch of PDFs, but you may not know too much about how to make a PDF. And it turns out that PDFs are actually really simple. Like this right here, this text here that basically fits on one editor screen is a complete PDF. You can kind of just type it in and save it, and you'll get something that looks like this. So PDF is not a super complicated format at heart, but over the years, Adobe has added layers and layers and layers of stuff that you can embed inside PDFs. You can put Flash files into a PDF. You can put chunks of web pages into a PDF. You can put functions inside a PDF, if you want to tell the PDF viewer how to render colors and things like that. You can put rich text inside a form field in a PDF. There's actually a subset of XHTML that you're allowed to put inside PDFs. You can put video, you can put sound. You can even put 3D models into a PDF, which I think is pretty wild. But for the purpose of this talk, and for the purpose of making the Breakout game, what I'm interested in is you can put JavaScript into a PDF. You can put these things called JavaScript Actions inside a PDF and make them run when you first open the PDF or when you hover over something. You can write little chunks of JavaScript and put them inside, and then the PDF viewer is supposed to execute those. So let's see one of those right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that minimal PDF that I showed a few slides ago, and I'm just going to inject a little chunk of JavaScript inside. So what this JavaScript that I've added is going to do is, when I load this file in my PDF viewer, it's going to wait 2 seconds, and then it's going to show me a little pop-up box saying hello from PDF JavaScript. So load this up and wait 2 seconds, and we get our pop-up. So that's the kind of very basic minimal JavaScript inside a PDF. And now that you've seen that working, I kind of want to zoom in on this code a little bit, because it's a little weird. If you've done browser JavaScript or Node.js, you're probably looking at this this doesn't match up with how you usually write JavaScript. It's the same JavaScript syntax, it's the JavaScript language, but the APIs are not the same that you normally use in a browser. There's this app.dot thing, there's this set timeout thing. This app.alert is in a string and not in a closure. So it turns out that the JavaScript that you can embed in a PDF is the standard JavaScript language, but the APIs that you call to do things are totally different. And Adobe has this whole spec, it's 800 pages, that's the reference just for PDF JavaScript calls. And if you dig around in it, you find, for example, the set timeout function that we were calling earlier, and it has a capital O, for instance, whereas the one in the browser obviously has a lowercase o. So just tons of little things like that are totally different. But it actually gets even weirder than that to make this Breakout game, because I've been showing you these PDFs in Chrome, and this reference is for Adobe Acrobat. So this is what you're supposed to do if you're a PDF viewer. But Chrome actually only implements a weird subset of these APIs. So I went and I dug around in the Chrome source code, and I found the places where they implement the PDF functions that you can call from PDF JavaScript. And it turns out that a lot of them are just not implemented by Chrome for security reasons, or just because Google didn't bother to implement them because they weren't important to whatever they wanted to do with a PDF viewer. So to make this Breakout game, we're in this really weird situation where not only are we not using the normal browser APIs that we're used to, we're not even using the specified PDF JavaScript APIs that Adobe says you're supposed to have. We're using Chrome's weird subset of Adobe's weird PDF JavaScript APIs. And this brings up a lot of very strange problems and workarounds that I needed to do to get this to work. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them. First, how did I draw things in the first place? Second, how did I take mouse input And third, how do I like get the screen to refresh clearly? And that'll make more sense after I go through the first two. So first, how do I like draw the ball and the paddle and the bricks, and how do I get them to move? Because, you know, if you're in the browser, you can just use Canvas, or you can use SVG elements or whatever. There's like a bunch of ways to draw things normally inside a browser, but in PDF, you don't get any of that. So it turns out that the one thing that Chrome does let you draw is text boxes. So this green box here is actually a text box, like the kind of form field that you would type into in a PDF. And it turns out like this is basically all you need to make a breakout game, right? You can just make a lot of text boxes. So if we go look at this game again, it turns out that everything here is actually just a text box. So that solves our problem of how to draw things. But it doesn't solve the problem of how do we get input, right? Because to play the breakout game, we're constantly moving the mouse left and right. So how do we know where the mouse is on the screen? But it turns out that this hovering trick with the text box also gives us what we need to track the mouse position, right? Because all we need to do to know where the mouse is just make a ton of really tall, thin text boxes. So if you zoom in here, you can actually see the individual text boxes that I'm using to track the mouse position. So that's how I figure out where the mouse is I just figure out which of these really thin text boxes are you hovering over. But you can see that this starts to bring up our third problem, which is that Chrome doesn't really expect that you're drawing new things when a PDF is open. It doesn't expect that this thing is going to move. And so when I move this paddle, it actually gets smeared all over the PDF surface because Chrome doesn't know to clear away the old paddles. So that brings me to the third problem, which is how do I tell Chrome, hey, I've drawn a new paddle. I want you to clear away the old stuff. And to solve that, I used, again, just a giant text box. So what happens is I move the paddle around. As I move the paddle around, there's a giant text box in the background that just flashes. Here I'm having it flash pretty slowly, so you can see how it clears away all the old paddles every time it flashes. But in the actual game, I do the exact same thing, just a lot faster. So as I'm moving the paddle here, there's just a giant text box that's flashing many, many times a second, clearing away all the old stuff. If not for that, it would be smeared all the time. And you know, with those three hacks, and with the ability to write arbitrary JavaScript to run all these things, that's basically all you need to make a breakout game. And that's all it takes. Thanks.